The storm didn't just come, it crashed in like a wild animal. It screamed through the hills and fields, shaking everything in its path. Snow slammed sideways across the empty countryside, not falling gently but flying like sharp white blades. It spun and twisted, blinding everything in a sea of white. The sky was filled with roaring gusts that never seemed to end. Trees groaned under the pressure, branches snapping like dry twigs. Power lines danced in the wind. The roads were no longer roads, just white deserts of ice and snow, vanishing into the distance. It wasn't the kind of cold that just bit at your fingers or stung your nose. No, this cold was deeper. It reached inside you. It emptied out your chest, hollowed your bones, and stole the warmth from your breath before it left your lips. The kind of cold that made you feel like you were disappearing, like everything around. You had stopped breathing, but in the middle of all that fury, something was moving. Something small, something alive. A tiny shape, nearly invisible in the storm, pushed through the snow with slow, shaky steps. A puppy no more than a few months old was trying to walk through the chaos. Its legs trembled. It was no bigger than a loaf of bread. The wind knocked it sideways, but still it stood back up. Its soft fur was frozen stiff, packed with frost and stuck flat to its skinny body. Ice clung to its whiskers, hanging like tiny daggers. The skin on its paws was cracked and red, pressed raw against the frozen earth. Each step left a smear of blood in the snow. Every breath came out in a cloud of pain, its little chest rising and falling too fast. It was starving, but the hunger was no longer sharp. It had faded into something distant, something numb. The cold had taken over everything now, but somehow it kept going. It had no name, no collar, no home, no memory of warmth or kindness. It didn't know what hope was. It didn't know what it meant to fight or to survive. It didn't understand why it was still moving, but deep inside, in a quiet place no one could see, there was something aflicker, a tiny spark buried deep in its chest. It was faint, like a whisper, but it refused to go out. That ember pushed it forward, step by painful step, through a world that seemed to want it gone. And then through the blur of white and gray it saw it, a light, small, barely there. But it was real. A porch lamp. That little ember inside the puppy flared. Not big, not bright, but just enough to make it turn toward the light. It didn't think. It just moved, slowly, carefully, dragging itself forward with what little strength it had left. The wind seemed to notice. It howled louder now, angry, cruel, as if it knew the puppy had seen something better. Snow came down faster, like the sky was trying to bury it before it reached the end. But the puppy kept crawling, legs giving out, chest heaving, slipping and sliding over the frozen ground. It didn't know how long it had been walking. Maybe minutes, maybe hours, maybe forever. Time was gone now, lost somewhere in the storm. But the light was still there, still flickering, still waiting. And then through the swirling snow the house appeared. A real house. A porch covered in drifts, wooden steps leading up to a door. The glow from the porch light spilled out across the snow like golden paint on a blank canvas. It looked warm, so warm it almost hurt. The puppy reached the first step, stumbling, legs shaking so badly it almost fell. The ice-covered wood was slick under its paws. It tried to climb, slipped. Tried again. It had nothing left, but still. It tried. One trembling paw lifted, scratched weakly at the door. The sound was soft, lost in the wind. It scratched again, dragging tiny claws across the frozen wood. Then it let out a whimper, so faint it was nearly silenced. No one came. Its head lowered. Body swayed. It scratched once more. Just a whisper of a sound. Then As the cold wrapped tighter around its tiny body, it collapsed against the doorframe. Eyes fluttering. Breath shallow. Still. Sophia sat just behind her, watching notingly Ember. But Emily, her daughter's face was calm, focused, lit only by the soft flicker of firelight. There was something in Emily's gaze, something steady, something ancient, like she understood more than her 9 years could explain. Then slowly, Ember stirred. It was barely more than a twitch at first, a faint shiver, a stretch of his paw, a tremble of his nose. Emily gasped softly and leaned in. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy. At first confused. Then they locked onto hers. Sophia leaned forward, holding her breath. Ember didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He didn't even hesitate. Instead, he inched forward just slightly and placed his cold, damp nose against Emily's hand. Then slowly, carefully, he licked her palm. It was such a small gesture, barely anything at all. And yet, it cracked something wide open inside Sophia's chest. This creature, this fragile, near-frozen life, had every reason to fear, to hide, to give up. But it didn't. It chose to trust, to reach out, to love in the simplest, mostest way. Sophia swallowed hard. She realized she had built walls so high, so carefully that she had almost forgotten what this moment felt like to witness trust offered without condition, to see love that wasn't earned, only given. Emily looked up at her mother, then, her eyes shimmering. "He knows he's Safino," she said. Sophia nodded, unable to speak. And in the hush of that firelit room, where warmth met silence and trust met healing, something long asleep in Sophia stirred. Not pain this time, but something gentler, something like peace. The next morning the storm had quieted. Snow blanketed the yard in soft curves, smoothing over everything the night had torn apart. The world outside looked peaceful, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But inside the house, something had happened. Ember was no longer motionless. Though still weak, he was warm, wrapped securely in a blanket beside the fire. His breathing had steadied, and he even managed to smally on, followed by a sleepy stretch that made his legs wobble and his ears flop sideways. Emily giggled. It was soft at first, hesitant like a note played on an old piano, but it was there. A relaw. The kind Sophia hadn't heard in months. She looked up from the kitchen doorway, mug in hand, and froze. Emily was lying on her stomach on the rug, chin propped in her hands, watching Ember with wide-eyed joy as he attempted to stand, only to clumsily tip over and land with a quiet whump against the pillow. Another giggle, louder this time. Then he walks, like he's wearing invisible socks. Sophia laughed, not just because it was funny, but because of how Emily was laughing. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was free. It was alive. She didn't interrupt. She didn't want to break the moment. Instead, she leaned against the doorway, eyes warm, heart swelling, and listened to the sound she thought she might never hear again. Her daughter's laughter, blooming like spring inside a house that had known only winter. That night the house was still again, but not the same kind of stillness as before. This quiet held warmth. There was life inside it, no? Gentle breathing, the crackle off fire, the soft thump of paw shifting in sleep. Ember lay curled in a makeshift bed beside the fireplace, nestled in a nest of blankets. His belly rose and fell in a steady rhythm, tilt-witching now and then in dreams. Just inches away, Emily slept on the couch, one arm draped over the edge, her fingertips, brushing Amber's back as if to make sure he wouldn't disappear. Sophia sat in the armchair watching them both. Her mug sat untouched in her lap, steam long faded. She wasn't tired, not in the way that led to sleep. Her exhaustion was quieter, the kind that came from carrying too much alone for too long. She looked at Emily's peaceful face, then at Ember's tiny, contented frown. Her eyes stung, but no tears come this time, only breath, only stillness. And then in a voice barely louder than fire, she whispered, "Thank you." She didn't say it to anyone in particular. Maybe to Ember, maybe to Thesilence, maybe to whatever. Part of fuel had guided that little pup to their door. "Thank you for bringing her back," she added softly. Her voice broke just a little, not from sadness, Butralese. Then she looked toward the family photo of the mantel, her husband's smile forever frozen in time, and whispered once more, "She's smiling again, and so am I." The flames flickered gently, the room glowing in gold and shadow. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sophia didn't feel alone. Outside, the snow had begun to glisten under the pale light of morning. Emily and Ember dashed through the snowdrifts like wild joy had finally come home. Laughter ringing us, bright as sleigh bells. Tiny footprints crisscrossed the white ground, hers light and skipping, his small and scattered. From the window, Sophia watched them, hands gently wrapping air in a warm mug. She stood there wrapped in the soft hue of morning and something that felt like peace. A voice, quiet, certain, filled the stillness. When we open a door for someone else, it might be the very moment we open our own hearts again. Listen for the knock. Sometimes it's hope trying to find its way back to